The Zion Road Ministries way. Hey, the Zion Road Ministries way.
Hello, Zion family and friends. Thank you for tuning in to our midweek Bible study. Today we're going to continue on with the study around the holidays. And today I want to look at the roots of Christmas. And let me start off with a verse from John 8:12. It says, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. All right, so the roots of Christmas. Where do we begin? I would say if you have a piece of paper and you can draw a tree with some roots, and we're going to start right there and we'll just begin to go up that tree. And let's start with a woman by the name of the Great Mother. She has many names. Queen of Heaven, Ishtar, Isis, Diana. So she's down there in your roots. And let's say she had an entanglement with a false god. She's a false goddess. She has an entanglement with a false god. His name is Baal. So get that on the other side of your roots. Baal, another name for Baal is Molech. And together they produce a son. And that son's name is Tammuz. Get him in there in your roots. Tammuz has another name. It is the undefeated sun god, the undefeated S-U-N God. And he's given this name because of his supposed death and rebirth. And at his birth, or his reincarnation, it is said that he was visited by shepherds and angels and a rock and all of these kinds of things. But his birthday was celebrated December 25th. So here we have a false god, Tammuz, who's celebrated on December 25th, a time known as Saturnalia, the worshiping of the sun god. And it evolved into the celebration of the winter solstice. All right, so thus far we have these particular characters in our roots. And you got a question, and your question is, okay, Pastor, December 25th, Saturnalia, winter solstice, Tammuz, Jesus' birthday, December 25th. Is it coincidental that they're born at the same time? Were they born at the same time? Well, how did we get the times mixed up? Is one pagan, one piety? Does one represent raucous, one religion, one traditional, one biblical? What is it? Does the Bible say anything concerning celebrating the birth of Jesus? We got a lot of questions to answer. Well, let's then start with Jesus and some background there. I gave you a timeline a couple of weeks ago of the approximate time of his birth. And with that, we went to Luke, the second chapter. And there is an account where Mary and Joseph made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem annually. And it was because, and I told you then, it's because it was a time that a census was taken. Well, it was also the time that they would pay their taxes. It was the end of the harvest period. Joseph had a little change in his pocket. And if you will, Uncle Sam knew it. So he said, come to Jerusalem and pay up. So it was also a good time to travel. There was purpose in the traveling at that time, which was between, we said, August and October. What was going on in Jerusalem was the Feast of Tabernacles, which explains also the reason we said that the shepherds were in the field at that time watching their flock. Some have Jesus being born December 25th, but there's a problem with that because the shepherds and their sheep were sheltered in caves in those wintry periods of Bethlehem. They're only in the field at that particular time because at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, the last day, they offer up a sacrifice to God. So they would then choose particular sheep to be sacrificed, and those shepherds were out there watching them. So let's get back to this timeline. If Mary and Joseph were there in Bethlehem between the time of August and October, then it says that she gave birth to Jesus at that particular period. His birthday would have been somewhere in September. September? Well, then how do we get December the 25th? Again, we have to remember that the pagans in Rome worshiped and honored this sun god December 25th during what is called the winter solstice. What is that? All right. The winter solstice marks the end of a long winter and the shortening of days. It is, if you will, the ending of the time of increase in darkness and the beginning of the time of increase of light, if that makes any sense. Malachi 4:2 says something really, really interesting that I need you to get. Malachi 4:2. The prophet Malachi says, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. That Son that he speaks of there, you see, is the S-U-N. The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wing. That's interesting to me because we have to consider this question. Is it possible that Jesus, the Son of God, was conceived exactly at that period when something was going on in the horizon, where light was overtaking darkness? Interesting, isn't it? Well, also during this time of December 25th, there's another celebration that's going on. Not just winter solstice, but there's a celebration that's been going on for centuries now, and that's Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah? Hanukkah commemorates the victory of the Israelites over the Syrian king or the Syrian tyrant Antiochus. And Antiochus is known for his victory over Jerusalem and desecrating the temple by sacrificing a pig on the altar. The Jews are known for honoring the temple of God, and they were highly offended by his act and wanted to exact revenge on this. So a man by the name of Judah Maccabee pulled together an army against this large Syrian army, an army of unskilled warriors. They were outnumbered, but God gave them victory. And after the victory, they cleaned, they restored the temple, and they found a cruse of oil in the temple. And from that oil, they put it in a menorah that was in the temple, lit the menorah. The oil that they found was only to last for one day, but miraculously, the menorah continued to be lit for 8 days. And from that, we now have what is known as the Feast of Dedication and or the Festival of Lights. It's something that the Jews still celebrate today. So Hanukkah speaks of national liberation. It speaks of the fervent spirit of the Jews. Now, while it's very honorable in terms of what they did, and while we note their dedication, and we should learn something from their dedication, I have to point this out to you. The same God that allowed that army to go in and defeat the enemy, cleanse the temple, also allowed that temple to be destroyed, and he scattered the people. But before he scattered the people, he would send a temple, Jesus Christ, that did not need to be cleansed. So let's look so far at the days that we have. We have winter solstice that we just talked about, and we have Hanukkah. Now, if we want to talk about the possible conception of Jesus, look at those two times, and that happened in December the 25th, right? And let's count 9 months forward, and that brings us to what? September. So again, if we say that he was conceived during this time, possibly, then we move forward. That brings us to September sometime. Okay. Also, in looking at these particular times, it is possible to say that he was conceived December 25th, conceived, that is. When we look at solstice, he is the light of the world that came to overtake the darkness. And when we look at Hanukkah, he is the temple that didn't need to be cleaned. But there's something else to consider here when we look at the other feast days that God ordained. For instance, when I look at how Jesus fulfilled the Feast of Tabernacle, when I put those events side by side and look at them moment by moment, I say, wouldn't it be uncharacteristic of him not to come on another feast day, which would have been at that time the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, to dwell? Also, if we say that we're to celebrate these particular times, are we not following the traditions then of men? And then what do we do? Let me turn to it. What would we do with what he says in the scriptures of following the traditions of men? Mark 7 and 8. You have let go the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men. Listen to how it's read in the Message Bible. They act like they're worshiping me, but they don't mean it. They just use me as a cover for teaching whatever suits their fancy. Ephesians 4 and 25 says this: Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor. So in light of all of what I've just shared with you, let me read this again. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor. Again, I want to reference the Message Bible, as it's really clear. It says, what this adds up to then is this: no more lies, no more pretense. Tell your neighbor the truth. Let me give you one other passage before I go any further. And while I want you to turn to it, it's Luke 18 and 15. Speaking of falsehoods, when we teach our children about Christmas, Santa Claus, are we bringing up falsehoods to them? Are we telling them untruths? Are we lying? Are we just helping them to develop their imaginations? What are we doing? Jesus says this in verse 16 of Luke 18. But Jesus called the children to him and said, let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. How does the Message Bible read this? It gets down with it. It says, don't get between them and me. Don't get between them and me. Okay, so let's get back to your tree here. I haven't forgot. You got your roots here with your false gods at the bottom. Outside of this tree, we begin to talk about the history of Jesus. But what's going up in the root of this, in the trunk of this tree? Remember, you got your roots here. Over here on the other side of this tree, Jesus says, don't get between them and me. Them being here, me over here. And they say you got this trunk coming up here. And let's start putting things inside of this trunk. What's the holiday that's coming up on us now? Halloween, put that in there. The tooth fairy, put that in there. The Easter bunny, put that in there. Because all of these emerge from these false gods, you see. And now we get to Santa. Put him in there. And I want you to think with me. Come along and think. I want you to come into my mind, and I want to unveil to you some of the things that I think about. My precious godmother, who's gone on to be with the Lord, used to say to me when I was really young, Timothy, I need you to use your head for more than just a hat rack. And when she said that, it convicted me. And she was speaking of even the hard subjects. I need you to think through it, think through it, think through it. So I think, and I try to think through things. So getting back to this winter solstice and how it was celebrated with revelry and drunkenness and disorder, there was a false god, put this in your trunk, named Odin. He was a false pagan god of the winter who was thought to ride over the sky and determine who's naughty and who's nice. And he would also determine who would receive promises or prosperity and who would perish. He was the beginning, if you will, of this Santa Claus. Well, Odin emerged over time, and then we get St. Nicholas, who was a Greek Orthodox bishop. And it was said that he had, if you will, omniscient-like qualities. And he would determine the good children and the bad children. And so the good children would wake up in the morning to presents, and the bad children would wake up sulking. And so you have this period where time moves on. The Dutch heard of St. Nicholas. They called him Santa Claus. Yeah, Santa Claus. And when the Dutch moved to America, we caught a hold of it, and we called him Santa Claus. And a preacher by the name of Clement Clark Moore in 1822 wrote a famous poem. Initially, he didn't attach his name to it. You know what the poem was? 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. He didn't attach his name to it because he knew it was wrong. He knew it was secular. But boom, it spread like wildfire. And after a while, now kids are looking for St. Nicholas, Santa Claus in the sky. Well, around 1863, a fellow by the name of Thomas Nest caught a hold of this phenomenon, this Santa Claus. And he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a character. So he creates this new Santa Claus. He's no longer the Odin of the winter solstice times. He's a jolly, fat guy in a red suit. And then in 1939, Robert May of Montgomery Ward Stores said, you know what? this Santa Claus that's been created is a phenomenon. He's a superstar. And every superstar, every Batman needs a Robin. So he creates Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. For what purpose? The backstory is to lure shoppers into the stores, to use this fictional character. Let's give him a physical handicap and use him with this guy who supposedly is giving gifts and doing great things and moves into the hearts of people. And there we have it. And it's big. It's big. And you got your songs going on, and Rudolph is lighting up the world. And at the same time, we're claiming that all of this is about Jesus. And I'm looking at Santa Claus. And remember, my godmother told me, Timothy, use your head. So I'm thinking, and when I hear the words of Megyn Kelly, when I hear the words of Mr. President, when I see the marketing strategies, I begin to wonder.
Santa Claus should not be a white man anymore. And when I saw this headline, I kind of laughed and I said, oh, this is so ridiculous. Yet another person claiming it's racist to have a white Santa, you know? And by the way, for all you kids watching at home, Santa just is white, but this person is just arguing that maybe we should also have a black Santa. But, you know, Santa is what he is, and just so you know, we're just debating this because someone wrote about it, kids.
We are stopping cold the attacks on Judeo-Christian values. Thank you. Thank you very much. And something I said so much during the last 2 years, but I'll say it again as we approach the end of the year. You know, we're getting near that beautiful Christmas season that people don't talk about anymore. They don't use the word Christmas because it's not politically correct. You go to department stores and they'll say Happy New Year and they'll say other things and it'll be red. They'll have it painted, but they don't say, well, guess what? We're saying Merry Christmas again.
May your days be merry and bright. Come on into my world again and see what I'm thinking and try to understand why I am where I am with this thing. While there's no data per se that says suicide is on an uptick during the Christmas holiday season, I can tell you from years, decades of experience as a pastor that people are majorly stressed out. Why? Because of loss, the loss of loved ones. Many of them, as in 2020, are experiencing the loss of income. There are heartbreaks, there are breakups, there are divorce, there's family strife. And besides that, you have all of this pressure of having a Christmas like what you see in the magazines and on TV. And there is so much stress. Not only have I seen that stress on the outside with people coming to me for counseling and help, But in growing up, I remember a Christmas where it was kind of rough for my dad financially that season. And my mom wanted so desperately for us to have a good Christmas that she was up all night at the sewing machine trying to sew us some pieces so that we would have something under the Christmas tree. And I remember so well being upstairs and just hearing the rumbling of that sewing machine, and then my dad coming in late at night with some gifts. And I think back to that. And why did they do that? Definitely because they loved us, but the pressures from a myth, from a lie. I'm so grateful to report that before they went to their heavenly home, they heard my teachings on this, and they were able to understand and let go of all of the commercialism of that day. But still, I remember the pressure, and I'm sensitive to the pressure that many are under right now, and wondering how they're going to do this thing. Come into my world and hear how and what I'm thinking and why I feel about this. When I graduated from college, my first job was as a teacher, Cincinnati Community Academy. And I was a teacher of the arts. And my job, of course, was to get the little ones ready for the holiday productions. And oh, how well do I remember getting them ready for Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. And some of the little kids, a few of them coming to me and say, Mr. Pifus, we won't be able to do this. Why not? Because of our religion. And as I'm preparing a group over here, I'm noticing these kids over here just as content, not forlorn, not crying or anything, because they're not participating. They're good. But at the same time, I have to admit that in my heart, I judged their parents because I thought it was cruel that their kids were not allowed to participate over here in these things. And at that time, even though I was a young minister, I was not fully armed with the word as I am now. 2 years later, I became a pastor. We had a Halloween event. And one of my little babies wanted to show me her little outfit. And she came into my office. I never will forget it. She was so happy, dressed up like the devil. I sat there saying to myself, Lord, have mercy. It was there that the Spirit began to plant seeds in my heart and would begin to open me up to the truth. Jesus said the Spirit would come and guide us into all truth. And he did just that without me asking. And over and over, as I had encounters with the Spirit, he led me to points of history and regarding these holidays. And I discovered more and more as I looked at their roots were not holy at all, but pagan. And I had to decide what I was going to do with those things. And I made a decision to tell the truth. Well, Pastor, we need to celebrate. We need to celebrate. Yes, you do. I totally agree with you. And if you move away from these days, if we move away from these days, what are we going to have, Pastor? What are we going to have during these long wintry times? You have an array of God's feast days. Thank you, Holy Spirit, that we're starting to discover and rediscover. And all the things that God has outlined in those times that the enemy does not want you to understand. The ways in bringing the family together are just phenomenal. And I'm praying for you that you will be open to the Spirit, that you will be like the Berean Christians, that you would not just take what I'm saying, but you will study it for yourself. Go through. It's you can go online. Everything that I'm telling you, it's there. Study it for yourself. Pray about it. Stand on the truth of God. In closing, you know what I wish? I wished that as I was growing up, my parents, my grandparents had a greater understanding of these things. And I don't fault them for that. We're coming to a place of restoration of the truth, and I'm glad that God is using me as a vessel to bring these truths forward. And I try to do it as with mercy. And I want you to do the same. But you know, I wish that they had the understanding during that time not to be anxious to sit me on the lap of a Santa Claus. But if I was just sat on the lap of my grandfather to give me the rich history of the scriptures. I'm thinking of Deuteronomy 6:20. It says, in the future, when your son asks, what is the meaning of these things, these laws? Say to them, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. I wish they had confidence in the scripture enough to tell me about my father Abraham and the inheritance that I have from him. The blessings untold that I have. I wish they had the knowledge, the confidence, the conviction to say and ask me, okay, what is it that you want to do in your life? Whatever it is, we're going to invest in that and help you to get through it. I wish they were not concerned about supplying me with the things of the world, but really pouring more into me the word and the promises of God. I'm praying for you and your family. I learned something from those kids at Cincinnati Community Academy. And I'm forever grateful for their parents, teachers, and those students. What did they teach you, Pastor? To stand on what you believe. Even when you're criticized, even when you're misunderstood, you stand on what you believe. Do you believe that Jesus is the light of the world? then stand on that. Shalom.
The Zion Road, go in the streets where